Hey guys, welcome to CraterMania. I'm your host, the man they call Crater, and this is take two of this stream. So I had to end the stream that I was already doing. I started like almost an hour ago, and I had to end it and delete it because apparently there was no audio for that whole time that I'd been talking, whatever it was, 30, 45 minutes or whatever. Um, it was almost an hour, I think. So, but anyway, I'm gonna try to try this again. Um, first of all, welcome back to my 500 movies in 2025 series. For tonight's episode, this will be movies number 162 through number 166. So I'm almost at that 200 mark for the movies, guys, and I'm just chugging along really smoothly here. So getting these just getting these, out in these reviews, and I'm doing all these movies, and it's a lot of fun. But it is not even made yet, guys. But let me go ahead and just before I get into the show, just talk about, I went to Prestonsburg, Kentucky yesterday to Prestonsburg High School, and I went there for this little local wrestling event from Wildfire Championship Wrestling, where I got to meet ECW legend Sabu, and also got to meet the legendary tag team, the Powers of Pain, Warlord and Barbarian, and that was super cool. And just seeing those guys get to compete actually that night, as old as they are now, it was still super. They were in the 6-man tag with a local guy named Adam Newsom, and it's super fun, man. Like just seeing them. I'd seen Barbarian compete before, but never seen Warlord. And just meeting those guys was super cool. They were both very friendly, very nice. Um, and just the same thing with Sabu too. Getting to meet him, I've been waiting for that for like over for 25 years, maybe now, and just been a huge fan of him and just ECW for so long. Um, but yeah, just yeah, I love meeting those guys. I love taking that opportunity to meet any of those wrestlers like that come to my area, that I'm a fan of. And um, yeah, I'm hoping they do that company, that Wildfire Championship Wrestling, which is run by a Tommy Wildfire Rich, former NWA champion, in the NWA legend from the '80s, and just super cool. I hope they put more of those shows on in our area very soon, because I had such a good time. But I just wanted to kind of cover that a little bit and get that out of the way before I get into the show. Like I said, this will be part two of my Sword and Sorcery week. And if you watched the first episode this past Wednesday, I really appreciate that. And I hope you guys enjoyed that. Me talking about Beastmaster and Deathstalker and the Conan movies and Sword and the Sorcerer. And tonight I've got 5 more movies I'm going to be talking about as well from that whole Sword and Sorcery genre, including a couple of my favorite standalone Sword and Sorcery films of all time. But I guess I'll just go ahead and jump right into the show and start talking about that. So this first movie is kind of a follow up of the last 2 movies I talked about on part 1. Let me go ahead and pull this Sabu picture down. I almost forgot about that. Sorry about that, guys. But like I said, this first movie I'm going to be talking about is its own like standalone film, but it's like a follow up to the last 2 movies I talked about on here, the Conan movies, because this does exist in the same universe as the Conan characters in those movies. Although we do have Arnold Schwarzenegger in this playing a different role than he played as Conan. So that's a little strange to me, but I don't know. Like, we'll get into it. And if you're anything like me, and you're a true fan of the whole sword and sorcery, of the whole sword and sorcery genre, then just let me tell you, that Red Sonja is this glorious film that of just the whole sword and sorcery genre that really deserves a place in that whole, I guess, like a Barbarian Hall of Fame or whatever. And just from the moment that that red-haired fury, burst onto the screen here. You know that you're in for a good time, and just this very visceral journey, through a land where muscle and magic clash, and just where the stakes are nothing less than the fate of the world itself. Um, and I know that sounds really cliche, but let's be honest. We're not here for Shakespearean monologues. We crave action and adventure, and just and a hero who can just tear a path wide open. Through these hordes of villains with this very breathtaking style. And Red Sonja, I think delivers all this in in spades, I guess you could say. Um, so the film really plunges us, head first into this brutal world of where Sonya, played by Bridget Nielsen here, is she's just tragically violated and pretty much left for dead by these soldiers of this evil Queen Gedrin. Um, and this is a horrific act. It's undeniably very dark. It serves as this kind of crucial catalyst for Sonya's transformation into this legendary warrior that we know and love. And just her cry for vengeance is answered not by you know this very simple like thing, but just by this very raw supernatural power. Because she's granted these abilities like with like these enhanced sword skills, and it's from this like mysterious like spirit, and that's a very classic like sword and sorcery theme, and I think it's perfectly executed here, and just the you know, considering the condition that and that she can only be with a man who defeats her in combat. I think that adds a very fascinating layer of kind of independent strength to the character of Red Sonja. Um, and Bridget Nielsen, she is pretty much like the epitome of Red Sonja here, much like how Arnold Schwarzenegger is the epitome of Conan in those movies. But Bridget Nielsen, she embodies the character's kind of raw power, her distrust of men, which is perfectly understandable, given the situation and her trauma and all that. Um, and just she has this very unwavering determination. She's not just this pretty face that that wields a sword. She's a force of nature, and she's agile, she's deadly, and just very captivating. I think in every fight scene that we see here. Um, and let's talk about those fight scenes. So the director here, Richard Fleischer, he was a veteran that was known for his kind of genre bending films like Conan the Destroyer, which we just talked about. Um, and he understands that whole kinetic energy that is essential to sword and sorcery, and the clashes in this throughout this movie are very brutal and exciting. Um, and like Red Sonja has this kind of acrobatic style that's clearly on display here throughout the film. It's almost like a ballet of like a barbarianism, if that's even a word. And I love it. Every battle throughout this film is awesome to me, and beyond Sonya herself and the whole world building, while perhaps not as kind of deeply layered as a Tolkien landscape like Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth and all that. It's uh it's still a classic, sword and sorcery landscape. And from the whole temple where Sonya's sister Varna and all the priestesses, they're guarding this talisman. Um, it's just it's a very breathtaking like atmosphere, and I absolutely love it. And just speaking of the talisman, the talisman itself is this kind of fantastic plot point, where this mystical artifact of this immense power that threatens to tear the world apart, is this really classic, high fantasy stakes that keeps you invested, throughout the adventure. Um, and aside from Bridget Nielsen as Red Sonja, the supporting cast here really adds to the film's charm as well. Because you got like Sandal Bergman, who's back, who was in the original Conan the Barbarian film. But this she plays a very different role in this film as Queen Ghidran, and she's very, very delightfully villainous. And she's not just evil; she's just this power hungry bitch pretty much, and she's very ruthless and just driven by this kind of desire to dominate, and is very capable of all this like immense cruelty. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, as I mentioned earlier, he is in this movie as this character named Calidor. While he's technically not Conan, but that character is still like a very Conan-esque character. Um, but his presence, is I think undeniably magnetic here, and that the whole playful banter that that he has with Sonya throughout the film, um, coupled with that impressive swordsmanship that he also brought in the Conan movies, I think that really provides a very welcoming dynamic to this film. And while some might see, like the initial interactions between Calidor and Sonya as kind of somewhat cliche, with the will they, won't they tension. I mean, it's executed, I think, with enough charm and action to really keep it engaging. And definitely, you can't forget about Prince Tarn, which is played by a very young Ernie Reyes Jr. And I love Ernie Reyes Jr. Also as Kino from Ninja Turtles 2, Secret of the Ooze. He was also in Surf Ninjas. I mean, he's a martial arts legend. I just think by having him here, where he's very young in this, he's a little kid pretty much. He adds a touch of that kind of youthful energy and comic relief to kind of balance these darker tones that are in the movie. Um, and his character's transformation from like this kind of spoiled brat to this very more responsible and capable individual is I mean it's a small part of the film, but I think it's a very satisfying arc for that particular character. Um, and just the story here, I mean, at its core is this kind of classic quest narrative, avenge the fallen, just retrieve this powerful artifact and, and save the world from impending doom. I mean, it's just a formula that works. And, Red Sonja executes it with, you know, it executes it perfectly here, I think. You know, we follow Sonya as she's kind of tasked with preventing Ghidran from using this talisman's, and its devastating power, to conquer the world. And her journey is kind of fraught with all this peril from battling all these men, at this mountain gate to facing Ghidran's monstrous killing machine. Um, I mean, the pacing throughout this film is very brisk, it rarely lets up. Um, and just, it's really, it constantly propels the story forward, all throughout the film. Um, but the whole climatic showdown at the end, at the castle amidst all this molten lava, and just all the like the crumbling stone. It's a very truly, like, I think, awesome visual. And it's a very fitting epic conclusion to the whole adventure. Um, and and some critics might point fingers, I think, at certain aspects, perhaps like the dialogue is occasionally cheesy, or the special effects might seem dated by today's standards. Um, but to me, these are just minor little things, in the face of the film's sheer entertainment value. And it's a genuine love for that whole sword and sorcery genre, I think. This is a movie I think that was made for fans, by people who clearly understood what makes this genre tick. These strong heroes, these very despicable villains, these very fantastical settings, and just all the action and just a touch of magic there to kind of bind it all together. It's very cool, and I love this movie, and I think that the whole legacy of this movie is, despite it not being a massive box office success, when it came out, I think undeniably its legacy of resilience and it has that enduring appeal because the fact that there have been numerous attempts to reboot this movie or create a sequel over the years, even after decades, speaks volumes, I think, about the character's kind of lasting impact and just the film's cult following. um just the numerous projects that have been mentioned over the years, from Robert Rodriguez's vision to they're, I believe, in the process right now of kind of developing this film about Red Sonja, and I think that really highlights that enduring desire, to see Red Sonja back on the big screen. Yeah, and it just goes to prove that that whole fiery spirit and kick-ass attitude of the character, seen here from Bridget Nielsen. I think that continues to resonate with audiences and filmmakers all over. Um, but overall, Red Sonja, it's not just a good sword and sorcery film. I think it's a great sword and sorcery film, and it's definitely a great one for genre enthusiasts. It's it's just very unpretentious. It's wonderfully entertaining, and it really captures that essence of of what we love about the genre. So if you've never seen Red Sonja, I definitely recommend it, checking it out. Um, but you know, do what I do, and if you've not watched the Conan movies before, or if you have watched them, watch those movies before you watch Red Sonja, because even though they're not an actual trilogy, it's good to look at them as like a trilogy because they all exist kind of in the same universe. Um, but moving on, I guess the next movie I want to talk about, and before I say what this movie is, um, this movie is one of my top. It's not my favorite sword and sorcery standalone film of all time, but this is one of the top. It's probably in at least top three sword and sorcery standalone films. And what I mean by that is like no sequels, no trilogy, just this is a one and done type film. So, and this movie came out in 1985, and so allow me to transport you to a time when fantasy felt real. And I know that sounds weird, but just stay with me here. So Ridley Scott's 1985 masterpiece here, Legend, uh, for a diehard sword and sorcery enthusiast like myself, it remains this very like a gold standard and just an absolute gem, I think, in the depths of all these fantasy movies that are out there. Um, this movie is very like a visceral, almost dreamlike atmosphere, and because you journey into this world where innocence and darkness clash in this this battle for the very soul of existence, basically. So from the very beginning, the movie grabs you and just pulls you to this extremely fantastical world. And and Ridley Scott, is of course, the visionary at the helm here, and he's a director that's already renowned for crafting these visually appealing worlds in Alien and Blade Runner and all that, and he's kind of known for his extreme attention to detail as well, and atmosphere, and just his ability to create these very cinematic universes that feel both grand and very deeply personal. And in Legend, he trades that cold steel and neon of sci-fi for these lush forests and these like gothic castles, and it's a whole fairy tale aesthetic. But his signature visual like flair and commitment to this world building that he's known for is just undeniable in Legend. He crafts this world that is both, I think, breathtakingly beautiful and just unsettling at times as well. And I think it really that perfectly captures the duality at the heart of this story. Um, so at its core, I think Legend is a classic battle of light against darkness, and it's kind of distilled into this whole um, very captivating fairy tale. We meet Jack, who is this young Tom Cruise. He's not quite the megastar yet or anything, but he still radiates this very raw and just very kind of earnest charm. And he's a creature of the forest, um, in a way, I guess, because it seems like he's kind of like he's been raised in the forest amongst these other creatures of the forest. So, but he's still a human though, and then but that's pure of heart, and he's deeply connected to this natural world, and he's just the embodiment of innocence, living in harmony with these creatures of the woods. Let me make sure my thing. Okay, just want to make sure I didn't have to start over again. Make sure my audio was working, guys. But like I said, he's like this. He's living in harmony with these like creatures of the woods, and it's almost like a stark contrast to these shadows that are lurking. Um, and his life, and indeed the fate the um, of the world, pretty much, is kind of intertwined with this girl, this princess named Lily, who's played by Mia Sarah, that you may know as the girlfriend of Ferris Bueller in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But in this, like I said, she plays Lily, this princess who is kind of has this very youthful curiosity about her. She inadvertently sets in motion the plot of the Lord of Darkness to plunge the world into eternal night. Um, and the whole inciting incident that happens here, is seemingly simple. Is just imbued with this kind of profound symbolism. So Lily, chasing these childish desires for excitement and perhaps a taste of forbidden knowledge, enters Jack's hidden forest realm. She throws her ring into this pond as kind of a playful dare, and just a symbol of impulsive innocence. And it's this very innocence that makes her the perfect bait for darkness's um, I guess malevolent plan here. So the goblins, Blix, Pox, and Blunder, which are these wonderfully grotesque, creations brought to life with prosthetics and just sheer character acting, are sent there by Darkness. And Darkness, by the way, is played by the iconic Tim Curry here. This is one of his most iconic roles, in my opinion. But the goblins that were aforementioned, they were sent there by Darkness to hunt the unicorns. And Darkness, understands that to extinguish the light, that he must destroy, the purest manifestations of innocence. And unicorns embody that purity. So the whole slaying of the unicorn stallion here, is after he's poisoned by Blix's dart, is a deeply affecting moment in the film. There's this sudden violent intrusion of evil into this kind of ideal world that sends almost like a very chilling wave of terror inside you and across the whole land in the movie. Um, and it's like this whole wave of winter hits the landscape, and just it's a very visual manifestation of darkness here. And Jack's kind of desperate attempt to retrieve Lily's ring here from the frozen pond, I think that mirrors his struggle to, reclaim that innocence from this kind of encroaching cold. And it's just a very powerful and early scene in the movie. It's very powerful. Um, but Lily, she's initially kind of dismissive, of Jack's warnings and all this, and she's confronted with this kind of horrifying consequence, of her actions. Um, Her flight to, she runs off, to this peasant cottage, and witnesses these goblins testing the horn's power, of the unicorn, and just realizing, her role as bait is a very crucial turning point. So she transitions from this kind of naive princess to this character who's burdened by the weight of her choices. Um, and it just sets her on this path towards, redemption and bravery and all that. We'll get to that. But what follows this whole sequence of events is this just very classic, story, but one kind of steeped in um, this fairy tale imagery, granted by all these compelling characters. Jack, who's now driven by this kind of sense of responsibility and, this desire to atone for his, perceived failure to protect the unicorns, he embarks on this journey to Darkness's castle, and he gathers together this kind of ragtag band of companions. There's Honeythorn Gump, who is this very kind of rude, very rudish like type character, but he's a very wise elf, and has magical powers and all that. And then you have Una, who is this kind of mischievous like fairy. She's a very powerful fairy, um, and these little dwarves like Brown Tom and Screwball. And Screwball is played by Billy Barty here, and this won't be the last time you'll hear about Billy Barty in this stream. But this whole fellowship is kind of, which is kind of like almost like the archetype of these fantasy adventures. It feels genuinely endearing here, and each character, adds a very distinct flavor and skill set to the quest here. Their journey to Darkness's domain is, just fraught with peril and wonder, and just the encounter with Meg Mucklebones. This is one of my favorite parts in the movie, because Meg Mucklebones is portrayed by Robert Picardo, who you may know from Gremlins 2. He was on some of the Star Trek series. He's in a lot of Joe Dante stuff. He was in The Howling. He is like a small part as a garbage man in The Burbs. But yeah, he's Meg Mucklebones here, and he's like this swamp hag. And it's a master class here, in creature design and practical effects. Just the grotesque beauty, if you want to call it that. Uh, and Jack's clever defeat by, flattering her, uh, before, decapitating her, showcases that the film's blend of dark humor and genuine threat and all that. Um, and then there's a part when they get to like the underground prison sequence where they encounter Blunder, who is revealed to be this dwarf that had gone astray and destined for this kind of um, this fate that brought to him. I mean, it really adds another layer of that kind of dark, whimsical, and like atmosphere, and just it underscores the whole corruption of Darkness's influence. And Una the fairy, her whole fairy nature, and her crucial retrieval of of the keys, I think highlights the importance of even seemingly small and mischievous creatures in this fight against evil. Um, but the heart of the film, I think, truly beats within Darkness's castle. So Tim Curry's performance as the Lord of Darkness here is nothing short of legendary. No pun intended. But beneath layers of prosthetics and all that, he embodies this being a pure, seductive evil. His voice is a very resonant, baritone, dripping with the kind of sinister charm, and it's just instantly iconic. His costume, a towering horned behemoth of shadow, is simply just awesome here, and it's kind of and it really fits that whole gothic theme that they have going here. um and Darkness isn't just a monster. He's a tempter, he's a manipulator, who recognizes and exploits the cracks and even that the purest of hearts. Um and his interaction with Lily is just kind of mesmerizing. um because he doesn't simply imprison her, he seduces her. He understands the allure of power, the just the intoxicating whisper of temptation, if you want to call it that. Um, just he presents her with these lavish gifts, the enchanted dress, just the offer of his dominion over darkness itself. These are not brute force tactics or anything, but just calculated plays to kind of corrupt her innocence. And I think that's genius, to add that aspect to the story. And Lily's, nearly succumbing to darkness's kind of lure is a testament, I think, to the film's, you know, um, just portrayal of evil. It's not just external. I think it's a whisper within, exploring desires and insecurities and all that. Um, and just her agreement to kill the mayor in the ritual, um, which is a shocking act of this kind of perceived sacrifice, is born not from pure evil, but from a twisted sense of kind of agency, I guess, if you want to call it that, and just a desire to understand the darkness that has touched her world. Um, and the ending here is this very awesome, very visually spectacular confrontation, between Jack, who is now armed with this unicorn horn, and and fueled by kind of this very righteous fury. He confronts darkness, and just the ingenious use of the ogre's platters as these kind of makeshift mirrors to reflect sunlight, which is a weapon, and a pure light against darkness. It is very brilliant, very visually stunning, um, and it's a great moment in the film. And just the fight between Jack and darkness is it's like a battle of wills, I guess. Of just of innocence against corruption. And Jack wounding darkness with the unicorn horn is really a symbolic blow against evil, but it's the redirected sunlight, the purest form of light, apparently, that truly banishes him, you know, into the void. So darkness's final words, however, kind of resonate long after the movie's over and everything. Evil is not destroyed, merely contained. Evil lurks in shadows. Evil lives in all men. And that's very true. I mean, that isn't just a simple fairy tale ending. It's kind of a mature understanding that the battle against darkness or evil or whatever, just toxic things in this world is ongoing. Both external and internal. Jack, severing darkness's hands, A decisive act of courage is a powerful moment of triumph. But that lingering threat, reminds us that vigilance and the constant striving for good are essential. So the restoration of the stallion and mare, the immediate thaw of winter and Jack retrieving Lily's ring are all classic, fairy tale resolutions. Um, but they feel earned, and deeply satisfying. And legend doesn't shy away from the darkness here, but ultimately it affirms that power of hope, and innocence, and all that, and just that enduring strength of good. Um, just the legacy and the impact of legend, I think, is a lot to look at here. And it wasn't a box office smash when it came out or anything, but it has grown into this kind of beloved cult classic. Particularly within the fantasy genre. Um, and its its visual style has really been hugely influential. I think inspiring countless fantasy films and video games, and just the practical effects here. The creature designs, just the whole gothic atmosphere of Darkness's castle. These elements, I think, are very effective even today. They kind of stand as this testament to this artistry of pre CGI filmmaking. And Tim Curry's performance as Darkness has become iconic, I think, at this point. And he's definitely, cemented his place as one of, I think, the whole fantasy genre's greatest villains. And like I said, this is one of my top favorite fantasy slash sword and sorcery films of all time that are, a standalone film. And not only is it just one of my favorites, I think it's considered as one of the greatest, fantasy films of all time. Um, but beyond the visuals, Legend, the movie resonates because it taps into something primal here, and timeless, and just within the kind of human psyche. It it speaks to our fascination with fairy tales, and our understanding of that kind of eternal struggle between good and evil, and our yearning for worlds beyond, beyond all that. So for sword and sorcery fans, I think the movie offers a very rich world of just these kind of mythical elements. A hero's quest, magical creatures, a powerful dark lord, and just this kind of world that's is teetering on the brink of annihilation. Um, but it elevates these themes with, like, these very stunning visuals, and these very compelling characters. And I just think it's and a depth of this resonance that goes beyond these kind of simple genre themes. And Legend isn't just a good fantasy film. It is a fantastic. It is an amazing fantasy film. It's just I think it is, in my opinion, it's a film that kind of rewards these repeated viewings. Um, just kind of revealing new layers of visual, and just, yeah, these new of like visuals with each time you watch it. And it's a film that kind of transports you to another world, a world that's both beautiful and terrifying. And it really leaves you, like, thinking about the whole nature of light and darkness, and that whole theme that is carried throughout the film. So, I mean, if you're a fan of sword and sorcery films, definitely this is one that should be at the top of the list to watch. If you're watching it for the first time, I mean, this is definitely just prepare yourself for a lot of fun, a lot of adventure, a lot of just dark elements to this film. Um, and just I feel like if you're doing like a fantasy marathon, sword and sorcery marathon, this is definitely should be an essential one to watch. So definitely go immerse yourself in this film, like and discover this timeless magic that this movie brings. I mean, because it's very unforgettable. I don't think you will regret, going into this. If you're a fan of Ridley Scott, definitely one. I mean, it's very different from Blade Runner or Alien, but I think you definitely will, recognize those touches that he puts on the film. Um, but yeah, so yeah, I love that movie. Like I said, again, one of my favorite uh, sword and sorcery fantasy films that are standalone films, of all time. But moving on, now I want to talk about a film. Now this next one is not your typical sword and sorcery film, um, and some people would argue that it's not. But I personally definitely always count it as part of that genre. And this movie, which is Highlander, by the way, the original Highlander, it's just it's this lightning charged epic, that really that pulses that very heart of the genre, of the sword and sorcery genre, you know, and but this film kind of forges its own path. So you can kind of forget your typical medieval settings and your Tolkien-esque like landscapes and all that. Highlander plunges us into this fascinating world that's kind of woven from the threads of history and just the modern world, and just all while kind of grounding itself in this timeless theme of immortality and destiny, and um just that enduring power of this warrior spirit. Um, so from the moment this movie begins, you're thrown into this world where the impossible is not only possible, but it's just violently and gloriously real. And Highlander delivers these sword fights with a very raw and visceral intensity. It screams sword and sorcery. At least to me, it does. And these aren't just like your typical choreographed dances with swords. They are these brutal, uh, desperate struggles for survival. Between these beings who have lived for centuries, and have honed their skills through these lifetimes of conflict. So the clash of steel here is very impactful. The movements are very impactful, and you can feel the kind of desperation and power behind each battle that you see on film. Whether it's the garage brawl in modern New York, or the battles that you see in the Scottish Highlands. Um, each of these fights is has their own kind of kinetic action to them, and there's a lot of tension, and just the ever present threat of of getting their head cut off is the because that's the only way these immortals can truly die. Um, and speaking of these immortals, the concept itself is, I think, pure sword and sorcery gold. Highlander gives us warriors that are ripped from the pages of history, pretty much. Each carrying these weight of ages in their eyes, and just the steel of these forgotten battles, in their hands. Um, and Christopher Lambert as Connor McLeod here I think, is another iconic character. He embodies that kind of weariness and that wisdom of this man who has seen centuries, past, and just yet he still retains this core of like human decency and this a burning passion, to protect what he holds dear to him. And he's not just this immortal warrior. He's this man that's really grappling with the burden of his endless life. Learning about love and loss in this world that's constantly changing around him. Um, but I don't think any hero is complete without a worthy mentor and also a very terrifying villain. Um, and Highlander, I think, delivers on both of those fronts with a lot of brilliance here. So Sean Connery as Ramirez, I think, is legendary. He's this very grizzled, witty, and profoundly wise swordsman who guides Connor. Um, Filling the movie with all this charisma and very like I don't know, very unique charm that only Connery could deliver, I think. Um, and I'm not a big Sean Connery fan, honestly. I think I also I like him as James Bond, but he's not like one of my favorite James Bond. But as far as like his roles go, this may be my favorite Sean Connery role. And just the training sequences that he does with Connor here they're very deeply engaging moments of the film, and there's a lot of camaraderie between the two, and just these philosophical discussions, and it just really, I think, enriches that world and Connor's character at the same time. And then there's Clancy Brown, um, who a lot of folks nowadays might know as Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob SquarePants, but back during these days when he was making the Highlander, he was known as the Kurgan. And the Kurgan is pretty terrifying. Um, he is the embodiment of chaotic evil, a monstrous force of nature with um, this blade in his hand, and he's got this hunger for power, and um, that stretches back into the darkest corners of the history, as well. So, Clancy Brown's performance here is just very captivating. And I think it makes, the Kurgan this truly unforgettable villain, which is a perfect foil, to Connor McLeod's kind of reluctant heroism throughout the film. But beyond all the characters and the battles and all that, what truly elevates Highlander into this kind of sword and sorcery masterpiece is just that blend of these historical flashbacks and the modern day story that's going on here. Um, we're transported from this kind of rugged beauty of this 16th century Scotland to this kind of neon drenched 1980s New York. And this is not just a gimmick for the movie. It's very integral to the story. It highlights that kind of that timeless nature of this immortal conflict, and just really underscores how these ancient warriors are are forced to adapt and kind of survive in this world that is both familiar and kind of foreign to them. So the flashbacks really provide this very rich historical context and like emotional depth, and it grounds those kind of fantastical elements in this tangible past. While the modern setting injects this whole vibrant energy and just a sense of these very urgent stakes that are at hand here. Um, if that makes sense, I guess. I mean, but that's what I've always kind of gathered from the film. And let's be honest. I mean, Highlander. I mean, you can't talk about Highlander without talking about the soundtrack for this movie. And the entire soundtrack was done by Queen. Yes, the legendary rock band Queen with Freddie Mercury. The music in this is more than just background noise. It's I feel like it's a almost like the pulse of the film. Um, the every time you hear Queen come on in the movie, it really amplifies every emotion, every sword battle, every moment of triumph and or despair. And the songs like Princes of the Universe, Who Wants to Live Forever, uh, A Kind of Magic. That though these are songs or more like anthems of that immortality that these Highlander characters are. And it also kind of is like an anthem of heroism, of defiance. It really perfectly, I think, captures the film's spirit and raw emotion. And I thought it was, just it was brilliant to have Queen, do the soundtrack for this movie, much like how they did for the Flash Gordon movie, which is a movie that I considered doing as well as part of the Sword and Sorcery week, but I'll definitely probably cover Flash Gordon at some point here on the channel because I do love that movie as well. Um, but Queen are just integral, I think, to the whole Highlander experience. You know, as much as everything else is in the movie, and yeah, Highlander. It might have been initially met, I think, with mixed reviews when it came out years ago. And it's another movie that wasn't really a box office smash or anything in its time. But, I think over time, this film has really endured and, it has gathered a lot of strength and kind of forced its own legend and become this kind of true cult classic. And rightfully so. It's a film that definitely dares to be different, I think. It takes risks, and ultimately delivers this very thrilling and emotional, like unforgettable experience, especially for the sword and sorcery genre. At least in my opinion, like I said, there are people that question that, and there's people that don't consider this a sword and sorcery movie, but I definitely do. I think it has all of the elements of a sword and sorcery film, and I think for any fan of the genre that are kind of yearning for something, beyond typical medieval fantasy themes, um, for a story that is both epic, I think, in scope and deeply personal in its character's journey. Highlander is an absolute must watch. And it's a film I think that understands that core appeal of sword and sorcery. Just the thrill of the fight, the weight of history, the allure of this kind of fantastical and enduring power of the human, or in this case, immortal spirit. I mean, there can be only one, as they say. Uh, and in this case, there can be only one reason you haven't seen Highlander yet, and you've been missing on a true cinematic gem. I mean, go watch it now. And I mean, if you've never seen it, and just another cool thing before I finish this up is that, because I'm a huge wrestling fan, and the movie starts out at Madison Square Garden as Connor McLeod is there in the audience watching the Fabulous Freebirds, Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy, and all those guys. They were all in the opening of this movie. So yeah, just definitely go watch this movie, and I just prepare to be electrified. Um, if I'm going to use an example of that's that involves the film. But yeah, definitely go check this out. I don't think you'll regret it. But moving on to the next movie. So this next movie. So when you hear the name He-Man, and you know it might conjure memories, of your childhood. I know it does mine. Especially my older brother Mike, who introduced me to the Masters of the Universe cartoon, and I played with the toys that he had. So when I learned about there being a Masters of the Universe movie that had come out as well, I was quick to try to find a copy of the VHS, from my local video store. Um, but nowadays, when I revisit this movie, which was directed by Gary Goddard, um, this whole journey into Eternia in this film, I can confidently say that this film, while it's perhaps misunderstood in its time, it is such a fun movie for, I think, any fan who really cherishes that spirit of sword and sorcery. And let's be honest, the premise alone, I think, is pure gold. We're thrust into the heart of Eternia, this world that is, teetering on the brink of darkness, and as the vile Skeletor, who is, the skull-faced fiend of immense power, he seizes Castle Grayskull. Castle Grayskull is, just the name itself, resonates with kind of ancient power and these untold secrets. Um, just the very essence of what makes this genre so compelling, I think. Um, the film doesn't shy away, from the stakes here. Skeletor, with who's portrayed brilliantly, I think, in this, by the legendary Frank Langella. He isn't just that typical cartoon villain that we know from the Masters of the Universe cartoon. This Skeletor is a genuine threat. He's hungry for cosmic power, and he's not having any mercy at all here on anyone. And Frank Langella's performance, I think, is nothing short of iconic here, because he just kind of chews up this scenery, with delight, and he delivers these lines like "I am a god" with such, I mean, such conviction that you almost believe him. And he isn't just this, typical villain. He is the pretty much the embodiment, I guess, of this very malevolent ambition, if you want to call it that. Um, which is a really a perfect foil to our heroic champion here, which is He-Man. And who is He-Man in this? Dolph Lundgren plays He-Man, which, Dolph Lundgren, this was 1987 when this movie came out, and, you know, Dolph Lundgren was coming off, doing, I think, Rocky 4 shortly before this movie, and, in this movie, in all his muscle-bound glory, I think he embodies that kinda raw power and that, that stoic nobility of the character. While his dialogue might be, a little questionable, I think his actions in the movie though speak volumes for this. Um, he looks like He-Man, ripped straight from a comic book or the toy packaging or the cartoon. Just um, he's just this very towering figure, of this pure heroic might. Um, and just his presence, I think it feels commanding, like, when he wields the sword of Grayskull, you feel that weight of destiny like it's in his hands. And, Dolph Lundgren, in a role that could have, easily been campy and forgettable for him. I think he delivers a performance, um, that was very appealing to a lot of people. He's not Shakespeare, granted, but it, he's He-Man, and that's exactly what this film needed, Um, but Masters of the Universe is more, than just its typical, hero and villain. There's a really cool supporting cast here as well. You got this kind of motley crew of attorney and warriors, that add a kind of a rich texture to the world. And got Man at Arms, who is played by John Cypher here, and he provides this kind of seasoned soldier wisdom, while Chelsea Fields, who plays Tila, is this kind of capable warrior, in her own right. And they just, she defies that kind of damsel in distress theme that's often found in this genre. Um, and then there's Gwildor, again, Billy Barty's back again, uh, as Gwildor, and he's just this kind of locksmith inventor, who is, like again, like I said, brought to life by Billy Barty. And Gwildor, with his kind of all of his inventions, and he's got this very endearing personality. Um, he really adds a touch of like lightheartedness, um, that I think really perfectly complements the serious tones of the whole He-Man and Skeletor conflict that's going on throughout the film. Um, but all of this whole cast of supporting characters, they're not just cardboard cutout type characters or cookie cutter type characters, whatever you want to call that. They are these very distinct personalities who I think contribute to this very vibrant world of Eternia. Um, Now, oh, I just seen that. Hey man, how's it going? I'm glad to have you back here on the show. Yeah, and I'm doing well, man. Thank you for asking. And I seen you also said that's what caught my eye. You said Dolph will be at Fan Expo Dallas, which is only 2.5 hours drive from me. Very tempted to go. Rocky Four's my favorite. Yeah, I love the Rocky movies, man. And stay tuned to the channel. Here in a couple weeks, I'm going to be doing both the Rocky series and the Rambo series. So if you like the Rambo movies as well, definitely check those out. But that's cool, man. I would love to. I've never met Dolph Lundgren, but I would love to meet him at some point. Um, I've never got to go to a convention where he was actually appearing at. But man, I hope you get to meet him. I hope that you have a good experience with him. Um, I'm sure that'll definitely be cool to meet him. Um, but back to what I was saying. Now let's. I want to address something that may be like the elephant in the room here. So Earth is presented here in this movie. Yes, it's a significant portion of the film that takes place in California, which is, I can understand, it's a very jarring shift from the kind of mystical landscapes, of Eternia. However, I would argue that this was a very bold move, and while it's initially surprising, it actually works, in my opinion, to the film's advantage in several ways. So, firstly, it allows for a kind of fish out of water scenario that injects humor and this relatable human elements into this epic fantasy. And the characters Kevin and Julie, who are these two teenagers who stumble upon the cosmic key, are kind of our audience surrogates, if you will. Um, they they react to the Eternian warriors and Skeletor's forces with this kind of same wonder and fear that we would, and I think it really grounds the fantastical elements in a very recognizable reality. But more importantly, I think the Earth setting allows the film to kind of explore the themes of heroism and responsibility in a very different context. And He-Man isn't just fighting for Eternia. He's now fighting to protect innocent Earthlings from Skeletor's evil, and just I think this expands on the scope of his heroism, and just it really makes the stakes even more personal. I think the battles on Earth, while perhaps I guess lacking the kind of that sweeping grandeur of Eternian landscapes, I feel that they're still pretty action packed and exciting, and they really showcase He-Man's strength and just that menacing power of Skeletor's henchmen. Um, just the clashes that they have in the high school and the music store, I think, are pretty dynamic in my opinion, and it really create these kind of memorable moments. Amongst this kind of suburban backdrop. Um, and I know a lot of people won't agree with that, but I love this movie. I'm not gonna lie. And I think visually, it's a very fascinating, like almost like a time capsule of 80s fantasy filmmaking. The costumes, while not perhaps not as elaborate as modern productions nowadays or anything, I think that they're iconic in their own way, and I think that they also kind of capture the spirit of the toy line a little bit. Skeletor's armor and makeup, I think, are really good here. And just uh, you know, He-Man's, his outfit, however it is simple, I think it's instantly recognizable. Um, and just the practical effects that are on display here, while sometimes they are dated, I guess, compared to today's standards, they to me they definitely possess this kind of certain charm and just physicality. I think that CGI lacks in. But you got the laser blast, the cosmic key portals, and just that raw power of Skeletor's magic is they all have this very tangible weight to them, and just remind us of a time when fantasy was brought to life, and just through this kind of practical craftsmanship. Um, and while the film might not be a masterpiece or anything, um, and it deviates away from certain aspects of the cartoon lore and the comics and all that. It I think it definitely captures the essential heart of the franchise, though. It's a film that's that's brimming with this kind of sword and sorcery theme of this powerful hero, battling an evil sorcerer for control of cosmic power. This mystical castle that's filled with all these these ancient secrets and a desperate quest to kind of save the universe from darkness. You know what I mean? It embraces that whole campiness and just the source material. It really delivers a genuinely entertaining adventure, in my opinion. And just this movie, it was a brave attempt, I think, to bring this beloved toy line and this cartoon to the big screen during a time when superhero and fantasy films weren't really a dominant force like they are today. Um, while it might not have been a box office smash or anything, um, I think it's kind of garnered its own cult following over the years. You know, uh, and I think that's precisely because of it has a very unique charm to it, and just it embraces that kind of um, you know source material in a way. It's a film that I think really understands the power of imagination, if that makes sense. Um, and just that can't talk, that enduring appeal of, heroic fantasy. So I think, if you're a fan of sword and sorcery, if you grew up with the toys or the cartoon from Masters of the Universe, um, or if you just simply appreciate a good old fashioned battle between good and evil, with a little healthy dose of 80s flair to it, then I urge you to revisit or watch for the very first time Masters of the Universe from 1987. Um, it's a film, I think, despite its imperfections, it possesses a genuine heart and a deep love for the genre. Um, I think it's a reminder that even in the most unexpected places, in this case, suburban California, um, the spirit of Eternia can live on, and the whole power of Grayskull can still be unleashed. And by the power of Grayskull, indeed, you might just find yourself yelling along with Skeletor in the post-credits scene, "I'll be back," which he never did come back, unfortunately. But use it in the sense that you'll be back, because frankly, you might just want to watch this movie again and again, much like I have over the years. But now that brings me to the last film of the night. And so let me start off by saying something truly important. That this movie I'm about to talk about is my favorite standalone fantasy slash sword and sorcery film of all time. Um, and it isn't just a film for me, though. I think that this is a cornerstone of my love for the sword and sorcery genre. It's a film that I measure all others against in the genre. And frankly, they rarely measure up. And um that's a genuine declaration from me, when it comes to my fandom for, fantasy literature and cinema alike. And this is Willow, starring Warwick Davis and Val Kilmer from 1988. And before I get into the movie, today we also sadly remember the passing of the magnificent Jean Marsh, who I think did an unforgettable portrayal of Queen Bavmorda here. Um, and it feels even more poignant, I think, to celebrate the magic of Willow. So it's also just very, strange, and sadly ironic that, I had this plan for a long time now to watch Willow on this particular week. And it's just so odd that the day that I do this stream is the same day that Jean Marsh, who played Queen Bavmorda, has passed away. Um, and I'll talk a little bit more of that in a little bit, but yeah, so I just want to go on record as saying that I want to dedicate this entire stream to the memory of Jean Marsh. So rest in peace to her, and my thoughts and prayers are with her friends and family and all her fans. So this is dedicated to you, ma'am. So first and foremost, for a sword and sorcery purist like myself, I think that Willow nails the tone and the spirit, of the genre perfectly. I mean, you can just forget all these sprawling multi-part epics and sprawling lore dumps or whatever. And Willow is a lean, mean fantasy adventure machine. It is a self-contained story of good versus evil. set in this world that's very rich with myth and magic, and but it's focused on this very singular, compelling quest. So we're plunged into this kind of world of this Nelwyn village, and just these imposing Nockmar castles of ancient prophecies and desperate chases, uh, all without needing to wade through this kind of endless exposition. It's, I think, a beautifully paced adventure that really understands the power of a focused story. Um, and man, you said that you love Willow in your house. We love, yeah, same here. My whole family, we all love this movie. Oh, and your dog is named after Kaya, so Willow's wife. That's really cool. I love that. Yeah, this is absolutely my favorite standalone sword and sorcery film. It's my favorite Warwick Davis film. My favorite Val Kilmer film. Love this movie. Absolutely love it. Um, but you know what? And speaking of all those guys, what a cast here! What a cast that this film has. I mean, uh, and like I said, it isn't just my favorite standalone sword and sorcery film. And, it also happens to be my favorite Warwick Davis and Val Kilmer film. I think that these are their very best roles that they've ever had. Warwick Davis as Willow is just simply iconic, in my opinion. He just really embodies the heart and soul of this film. He's not a warrior. He's not a chosen one in the traditional sense or anything. He's just this humble, like Nelwyn farmer. This he's aspiring to be a sorcerer, who really has more heart than he has skill. But and he's just this, he's just this average guy, pretty much. That's thrust into this adventure, you know, that's kind of beyond his kind of wildest dreams. And Warwick Davis, he plays Willow with this just very endearing vulnerability. Um and he has this very gradual growth throughout the film that you can't help but just root for him, every step of the way. And he's just incredibly relatable, I think, as this ordinary person that really faces these extraordinary circumstances. Um, and it's a performance, I think, that for me it's very filled with charm and bravery that has resonated with me since my childhood. Um, this is the Warwick Davis performance for me. I think it showcases his talent, beyond anything else he's done. Um, and then we have Val Kilmer, as Mad Mardigan. Oh man, Mad Mardigan, this role is just pure genius from Val Kilmer. And and we just lost Val Kilmer like a week ago. In the midst of when I was doing my Jim Carrey week last week, I hadn't initially planned to watch Batman Forever for my Jim Carrey week, but with the passing of Val Kilmer, I felt like I needed to. And just ironically, we're here 1 week later, and like I said, I've had this plan for a long time now to watch Willow on this particular week, because I have like this entire year of all these movies that I'm watching this year. I have them mapped out week by week. So then we lose Gene Marsh this week or today, you know. So we've we lost two Willow alumni just in the past couple weeks. It's so crazy. Um, and I've met Val Kilmer and I think I don't have it on my computer here, so I figured I'd show you the 8x10 printout of when me and my wife we met Val Kilmer um, years ago at a Wizard World Comic Con in Ohio, And when we got to his table, like this is the photo op here, obviously, but when we got to his table and talked to him, he only had like stuff from like Top Gun and Tombstone and Batman Forever. Um, Nothing from Willow. But, you know, and I didn't have anything with me for him to sign, but we talked a good while with him. He was incredibly nice, awesome human being. He loved talking about Willow with us. He says that's one that he doesn't, hear about often when he meets fans at conventions. So yeah, I love Val Kilmer, and like I said, this is my absolute favorite role of his, um, of all time. And just like I said, that whole character of Mad Mardigan is just genius. To me, just the whole peck, 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 and he's aggravating, Willow throughout the whole film. It's just he really delivers this performance with a just with a lot of wit and sarcasm and just very surprising depth. Beneath this kind of mercenary facade that he has about his character. Um, he's initially I think motivated purely by self interest, but he's this rogue that's kind of trapped in this crow's cage, and but as the film progresses, you witness his slow but this undeniable transformation. He's not just this comic relief for the film. He becomes this genuine hero, and he's drawn into this this quest by this kind of sheer force of circumstance, and dare I say it, a growing sense of responsibility and even tenderness for him. Um, just the chemistry between him and Warwick Davis is it's like this very perfect buddy dynamic that drives a lot of the film's humor and the heart. So for me, this is peak Val Kilmer. You forget Iceman or Batman or Doc Holliday. Mad Mardigan is where Kilmer's charisma, that comedic timing, what is the line that he says? Because when like Willow is threatening to throw this like what was it he had it? It was an acorn. He was threatening to throw the acorn at Mad Mardigan, and Mad Mardigan says something to the effect like, "Because oh no, there's a peck threatening to throw an acorn at me," or something. Something I forget how the line goes, but it's something to that effect. And man, that kills me every time. It's so funny, like just the way he delivers that line, and such with such sarcasm, and just I think this is where his that charisma, all that really shines with him. Um, but of course, like I said, you know, um, oh sorry, before I get to that, I want to just read the comments here. So uh, you say, "Oh, it Willow, yeah, it's so good, and rest in peace of those we've lost from this incredible film." I agree, Val is so good in that role. Yeah, yeah, absolutely, man. Rest in peace to Val Kilmer and Gene Marsh. Here recently, I mean, I know Billy Barty has passed away, and several other people from the film have passed away. But yeah, I mean, yeah, man, it is. It's definitely so good. Um, and you also said it's still so cool you got to meet him. He was on my list, but unfortunately, I would not have opportunity. Yeah, man, it sucks because like that was 2012 when we met him, and it seems like a few years after that is when he started getting really sick. And I know he was still trying to do like convention appearances after he got sick, but yeah, man, it's just he wasn't himself anymore from what I understand, because I know people that did get to meet him when he was doing conventions while he was sick and just said that there wasn't much interaction there. So I really consider myself very lucky to have met him when I did, when he was still healthy and very interactive with fans. So yeah, he was such a cool guy. Um, but I wanted to discuss next that because of Jean Marsh's passing, um, I have to acknowledge, her just formidable presence as Queen Bavmorda in this film. And just when I learned earlier, hold on, I think, okay, you guys hear me? I think I pulled my cord again on this friggin' headset. Um, it looks like the audio. Okay. Anyway, um, after I learned of her passing today, which was at the time that I started streaming, it was still April the 13th, 2025. It's now past midnight, so we're down to the 14th. But yeah, Jean Marsh, who played Queen Bavmorda, did pass away uh, earlier today. When I learned about that, it was from her complications of dementia, but she was, at the age of, she was 90 years old, so she did get to live a very long and fulfilling life. But it just really cast a somber shadow, uh, but of you know over the just this whole situation. It just because we just lost Val Kilmer, um, but with her, it amplifies, that impact of her unforgettable performance. And she was already known for, her roles in like Return to Oz, which I covered earlier this year, and where she played Mombi, and she was just countless other projects as well. But she just she imbued that role of Bavmorda with this kind of very chilling, regal malevolence, if that makes sense. Um, and she's not just evil for evil's sake. You sense a very deep seated fear and twisted logic kind of driving her cruelty. And her presence is very imposing. Her voice is commanding. Her eyes kind of burn with this like fanaticism. Um, and just Jean Marsh, I think she perfectly portrays that very dangerous fanaticism of Bavmorda, this sorceress who is willing to just commit these unspeakable acts of killing this infant child just to cling to power. She is this truly terrifying and memorable villain. And her performance is, I think, crucial to the film's success. Um, and knowing that this was one of her last roles of her career, I think this was the next to last film role that she was ever portrayed in. It just adds another layer, of appreciation for her dedication to bring such a compelling villain to life. Um, so yeah, thank you, Gene Marsh. Thank you, Val Kilmer. I think um, a lot of fans would think the same as I do. This is your both of your defining roles. For me, in my opinion, and so rest in peace to both of you guys. Um, but let's go ahead and I guess dive into the story here. So, um, because this is fantastic storytelling. It's perfectly, tailored for that kind of the whole film world. And that's this whole sword and sorcery genre. You know, we begin with this kind of chilling prophecy of this child that's destined to overthrow Queen Bavmorda. This, immediately sets the stakes and introduces this core conflict, the desperate chase of this baby with a birthmark who represents hope against overwhelming darkness. And the opening sequence, with the frantic midwife and the relentless hounds of hell or whatever they are, is just it's very gripping, and it really sets the tone, I think, perfectly. Um, and Willow inadvertently finding Alora amongst the Nelwyn village, coming down the river in the little basket. I think it just perfectly initiates this reluctant hero's journey. He's not seeking adventure; it finds him. And the whole Nelwyn community, the contrast between their peaceful lives and just that looming threat of Queen Bavmorda, it all contributes to this building of this richly realized fantasy world. And just the introduction eventually of Mad Mardigan, trapped in a cage and just kind of offering his services, for freedom. It's just a classic theme that's done brilliantly, I think. And just their initial, like uneasy alliance between Willow and Mad Mardigan. It's which is born of kind of necessity and fueled by this mistrust. I think it's just the perfect starting point, for their eventual friendship. Um, and the journey itself is just kind of a whirlwind of like classic fantasy themes that are executed perfectly here. Like the brownies, and just the encounters with the fairy queens, and the tavern that gets end up turned into a battleground pretty much. Just the escape across the lake, and just everything here, guys. I mean, it's amazing. Everything, and this is absolutely spectacular. Each location is very visually distinct, and it just adds to that world that we're experiencing here. Um, and just the magic system, while it's not overly explained, is very present and impactful. From Willow's clumsy attempts at like sorcery to Razil's like enchantments and Bavmorda's kind of dark rituals and all that. Um, but the story wisely avoids getting bogged down in all this excessive world building, and instead focusing on character development and just the momentum of the quest. We see Willow grow in confidence and skill, and Mad Mardigan's kind of shed his cynicism, and just he embraces heroism, and just even Sorcia, she undergoes this kind of compelling transformation from this loyal daughter to Bavmorda to being a rebel with a cause. And just the romance between her and Mad Mardigan is kind of subtly, handled, but it's very undeniably effective, I think. And it just really adds another layer of that kind of emotional depth to the story. Um, but the whole climax here, the ending here at Nockmar Castle, is a very I think is a very awesome way to to blend all the action and the magic and the wit, the humor, everything all together here. Um, and Mad Mardigan's kind of heroic stand against Kale, which is and Willow's very clever use of illusion against Mavmorda, and even Razil's timely kind of intervention all come together to create this very satisfying and triumphant resolution. Um, but the final touch of Willow receiving the spell book from Razil while choosing to return to his family, I think just perfectly concludes his whole character arc. And he's learned, he's grown, but he remains true to himself and his roots. Um, and honestly, I wish they had never even made that Willow TV series, because I think that the story should have ended there with how the movie ends, and I think it ends perfectly. And it's just ironic, that that TV series wasn't very successful, to even to the point to where Disney Disney took it off of their streaming app very quickly. So, and they didn't release it on any kind of, physical media or anything. So, yeah, it wasn't very good. I'll just say that, it was something that should have been left alone with this movie, because I feel like this movie is perfect in so many ways. Um, but beyond the whole captivating story and these stellar performances, Willow, I think, boasts a very significant legacy in terms of its visual effects. Industrial Light and Magic, owned by George Lucas. Very pushed. It pushed boundaries, with the whole digital morphing technology that was showcased in this movie. Just the transformation sequences, particularly Raziel's polymorphin mishaps throughout the film, I thought were groundbreaking, for that time, and just they still hold up surprisingly well. Um, and also, the film's kind of fantasy world is brought to life with these very impressive practical effects, and just the stunning location shooting and just this very imaginative creature design. It's a really a visual feast, if you want to call it that. That really enhances that kind of immersive quality of the story, if that makes sense. Um, but Willow's impact, I think, extends beyond all of its technical achievements. It's a film, I think, that inspired countless fantasy fans and just aspiring storytellers. It proved that you could, I think, create a compelling and successful standalone fantasy epic film without needing to rely on pre-existing franchises or sprawling adaptations. It's a film, I think, that champions the underdog and celebrates courage in the face of adversity, and just reminds us that even the smallest amongst us can be capable of extraordinary things. So, in conclusion, Willow is more than just a film for me. It is an experience, to say the least. It's a perfectly crafted piece of sword and sorcery cinema that, for me, remains unmatched. It boasts, I think, memorable characters, a thrilling adventure, stunning visuals, and just a heartwarming core that has really resonated with audiences for decades. And it's just a testament, to that power of classic fantasy storytelling, and a film that I will continue to cherish, and recommend to anyone seeking a truly magical escape. And as some of us are still mourning the loss of Val Kilmer, and today, we mourn Gene Marsh. You know, let us also celebrate, their incredible contribution to this timeless fantasy gem. Forever part of the enchanting world of Willow. So if you haven't ever experienced the magic of Willow, do yourself a favor and just and watch this movie. It's you will definitely not regret it. And after, if you've never seen it before, and after you see it, I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love to have a discussion with you. So leave me if you have never seen this and you're going to watch it for the first time, or if you've seen it multiple times, leave me a comment below and tell me how you feel about this movie. But, guys, I guess that is it for this video. I really enjoyed this entire week, guys, talking about all these sword and sorcery films. It's been a lot of fun, and just it just makes it even more important to do this with just the loss of Val Kilmer and now Gene Marsh, just to show how appreciative that I am and other fans are of this whole genre of sword and sorcery. Um, it's just very cool. It's something that's always been near and dear to my heart since I was a kid, and I just appreciate all of you guys for checking out these videos, and this one in particular. So thank you guys for for checking this video, whether it been live or being on the replay. Um, but again, like I said, drop me a comment below. Even if you don't want to talk about Willow, talk about what is your favorite sword and sorcery film? Do you like any of the ones I talked about tonight, or the ones I talked about on part one? You know, definitely let me know what you guys like, and if there's any ideas if you want me to do more of these sword and sorcery films in the future. What other ones would you guys like to hear me talk about? And as always, please give me a thumbs up, for this video. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. Um, and as always, if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button to catch more videos from me like this one. Um, so I guess one more thing, almost forgot. And click that bell for any kind of future notifications when you want to be updated when I'm going to be doing new videos. So, but with all that said, I'm Crater. This is CraterMania. I love you guys. Have a good night.